Hello and welcome to episode 16 of the barn door restoration. Last episode I worked on the rear frame. I got the transmission hoop repaired. The underneath was rusted and dented. I fixed that. Did a few other details of the rear frame. If you want to get caught up on any of the older videos, there's a link in the description for the playlist for this. So this episode I'm going to cover doing the inner frame panels in the front. I was planning on having both completely finished. But it's very hot and humid here the last while, and I haven't got as much work done as I expected. So when I took this apart, I think it was around episode 6, I took this storage box apart that goes under the seat to expose these. And I actually think I removed these from the frame around episode 9. Anyway, the bottom of these were basically completely missing. And then there was a lot of rust where the seam was across the top where it was spot welded. So I figured it was going to be easier just to rebuild the complete bottom and then reuse the top. Now this is part of the top. I trimmed the ends off it because they were quite rusty. The tops were a little rustier than I wanted along the top, so I ended up actually making these the whole piece and then just transfer the ribs in after. So when I took this all apart, I made drawings of all the components. So that's where I started. I printed out the flat pattern for this, taped all the sheets together, and cut them out. Except I didn't cut the this inner piece, the bottom section out, because of the curves. It's kind of hard to get an accurate drawing. So I think it'd be better to leave that. So I put the paper pattern on, held it with magnets, and then I measured for my pattern to the back beam and the height, made sure it was correct, and then just traced the curve in the bottom. So it turns out a couple spots I was out about 3-4 millimeters. The radius was off just a little bit. So I was able to trim to the new line and then just transferred that pattern to the steel. So this was 16 gauge steel. So original metal is 1.4 millimeters, which is pretty much exactly 16 gauge. Close enough. Another thing I should mention, I update my drawings also. The drawings for all these components I'm going to make available free, but I'm going to wait until I've actually assembled stuff so I can ensure they're perfect before I make them available. So probably a few more months before I have these sections ready to release. So I transferred the pattern to the metal, cut it out. Now there's some bends on here. There's a bend pointing out, another bend down here coming out or in. It goes up against the bottom of the frame. Another one on the front that comes in. The front one's easy to bend. These two kind of overlap each other, so I couldn't do them in the brake. So I could just start this one in the brake, but then I had to do it by hand. It's a bit of a pain. Once the bends are in, I clamped all this up, did some real accurate measurements from the rear beam and everything, leveled this, ensured everything was exact before I went any further. So that worked out well. I was quite happy with how it came together. I still have a little tiny bit of trimming on the curve where the welds are. This panel gets continuously welded around where the front beam goes. So there's a little bit of here I'm going to have to grind, but not bad. Just where it's uneven from the original metal. So once these were made, again, this was kind of rusty. I didn't really want to change the whole piece. I did think about stamping these in. Basically, make one die with a slot in it, and then another die, which is the inner piece. Put them in the press and press them. So I made a test die of one of the short ones, pressed it on a piece of sample metal. It worked, but a few things come out of that. One, this is kind of awkward. Two, the two pieces of die have to be lined up perfectly when you stamp them, or else it looks uneven. So it's got to be lined up perfect. So I was basically going to have alignment pins, which means my dies are going to have to be long enough to come out with pins in. Not a big deal, except that I have 4 different sizes to do. So it's 4 different dies I have to build. And it needs to not only push in, but it needs to clamp the metal on both sides. When it all comes together, makes a good solid squish. I figure by the time I made those dies, it's going to be a lot faster to just weld these in. Plus, I didn't have quite the right thickness of metal to make the dies out of. So that's why I decided to just cut them out and put them in. It didn't take too long. I cut out what I thought was a good metal, scribed it onto the new steel, cut them out, fitted them perfectly, and then tacked them in with the MIG. The trick with that is when you weld, it shrinks, and when it shrinks, it causes warpage, so it makes that all go snaky. So what to do is actually dolly the spot welds, or the tack welds, so you spread them out a little bit, and that gets rid of the shrink. So when you weld it, it pulls it in, you squish them, it pushes it back out. And the metal will come right nice and flat again when you do that. Then I weld it continuously all around everything. It makes it warp again. Do the same thing. I grind it down so it's just the weld's a little thicker than it should be. And then hammer and dolly around it until it comes nice and straight. This still has a little bit of warp in it, but I've got to go around the inside. I welded from this side. I got around the inside. There's a few little spots that need to be filled. And I'm going to use a TIG for that. TIG that all in. And I'll have to re-dolly it again. So I'll get it nice and straight next time. I should be using a TIG for all of this. The problem is I've been using the MIG welder for 40 years. And when I want to weld steel, I just grab it, I set temperature, line feed, and weld, and I don't have to think about it. But the TIG, at this point, takes a lot of thought. I'm not very good at it yet. I use it when I need to, if I got stainless or aluminum, but when it comes to steel, it's just faster for me to grab the MIG. So I am going to start practicing because I need to be able to use it when I get to the thinner stuff, the 20 gauge. I have a lot of work on these fenders, detail, and then the outer body panels, of course. So I want to be able to use a TIG for that. So I got to start practicing. This would be a good spot to practice. And so I'm quite happy with how these come out. I got them welded in so they match up perfectly. You notice the stamping is the same direction on both of them. I think when they made these, they stamped them and cut them out and stamped them, and then they added the bends after. So they both have the same stamping. Stamps out on this one, in on that one. But made a good way to make sure they're aligned. So the other thing I've been up to in the last couple weeks is getting a lot more parts built for the floor frame. Basically, I have everything done for this section except for the I-beams that go in here. Because it has 14 gauge, I'm going to have those bent on a hydraulic brake, because my brake will not bend 14 gauge this long. So I'm going to get those bent, and then I'll trim and bend the ends of them after. One thing I still haven't confirmed whether there's supposed to be a drain hole in these outriggers, and also the center of the cross members. I'm sure somebody knows that. Somebody has a bus that has original metal on it. I think the early ones didn't have the hole, and at some point they started adding the drain holes, but I'm not sure. So if you have an earlier bus and it has holes, let me know, because then I'll know mine has them. Well, I can assume it has them. But yeah, I'd like to know that before I weld any of this together, just so I can clean up the inside. It's going to be a little while before I weld this. I want to have all the parts built for here and fitted before I start welding anything. And then I'll weld this up, attach the frames together, weld this all in. It's much easier to ensure everything's perfect before I start welding, as opposed to after. I don't mind rebuilding parts. I really hate re-welding stuff. So I guess that's about it for this episode. Next episode, I'm not sure what I'm doing. I got to start the bottom panel for here. And that's going to take some experimenting with the bead roller, and I had to pre-stretch some metal with the English wheel. I haven't done that, so that's going to be some experimenting. I also want to build my jack points. There's 4 jack points that go on here, and I'm kind of looking forward to building those. So that might be my next episode. I'm not sure yet. Let's see. Thanks for the comments. I appreciate that. I keep watching for some detailed video of the work being done on these in some of this area. Thanks for watching.